Cool. Awesome. Kia ora again, everyone. Great to meet all of you guys. My name is Gabriel. I'll do the spiel a second time because we didn't hit record the first time, but that's okay. So yeah, I've this is our workshop Stand Out and Sell. I've sort of put this together because a lot of feedback had come through. Some of you guys are looking for some more marketing strategies, which is great. And so I'm really excited to kind of share, what are some of the like sales and marketing strategies that have worked not only for my business, but some of the other businesses that I've kind of helped grow in the time that I've been doing this. Yeah, like I said, if you guys could please drop in the chat a little bit of information about your business so I have a kind of good idea as to what the makeup is, and then I can sort of tailor advice accordingly. So this is super exciting. You provide an off-grid, indigenously centered hosting experience set in the far north. Love that. Sneakers, accessories, and clothing. Brilliant. Super cool. So one thing I will give you guys the heads up about, a lot of this advice was primarily designed for service-based businesses. Now, if you sell a good, don't worry, this is still super applicable to you. We'll just have to obviously tailor and refit some of these strategies, but we'll kind of get to that when we go over it. Online school, great, amazing. We love those. That's something that I'm involved with as well. So super cool. This will be super, super relevant to all of you guys. Radio, we will diving fishing charters. Oh, perfect. Love that. That is so exciting. You guys are involved in such great projects. So just for a start, we'll go over, I guess, sort of our vision here. So all of us want to have a thriving and a successful home-based business, right? We want to be able to provide a good livelihood for ourselves and our families. So how do we then go about fulfilling that vision? It'll be through our mission. And so the mission here is we want to build a community presence and the kind of customer base that's required to make that a reality. I think Jim Penman from Jim's group, Jim's Mowing, Jim's Dog Wash, Jim's everything. You guys, I'm sure, have seen their stuff before. He's written a great book. It's available online for free. I'd highly recommend it. I can drop a link to you guys afterwards. But it's called Every Customer a Fan. So that's kind of the methodology that's worked worked really well for me, and that I'm keen to share with you guys today. So what we're going to be covering, a lot of this is, sort of like kind of basic and introductory stuff, but I would really love for you guys to attend. We've got 3 sessions in total, because we're going to get a little bit kind of more advanced later on, but because I'm not 100% sure where everybody is at, I just want to start off with the basics, and at the very least, just kind of getting the mindset of sales and marketing right before we go into like the technical side of it, just so that we're all on the same page. So what I'd like to cover with you guys today, number 1 is the mindset shift. So I want you guys to feel very comfortable, if need be, shouting your service from the rooftops, right? So whatever your business is, whatever you provide, we can't afford to be shy about it. It's as simple as that. A lot of the clients that I've worked with in the past, I often notice and see that they are very interested and very passionate about the skills that they use to deliver their product. And that's great. But I once saw a really good interview with Robert Kiyosaki, the author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad. During a conference, he once had an author come up to him. She was struggling to sell her books. And she said, what do I need to do to learn to sell my books? And he said, you need to take a sales course. And she was offended because she was like, I'm an author, I'm not a salesperson. And he says, okay, well, what does it say on the cover of my book? New York Times bestseller, right? It doesn't say best author. So that mindset shift from realizing that actually we are customer service professionals first and foremost, and whatever our business, whatever our trade is, all of that actually comes second. The customer experience and the ability to generate and close leads has to come first. So that's the first thing I wanted to focus on. The next thing is dealing with rejections, just realizing, accepting, and getting comfortable with the reality that racking up rejections is actually not a bad thing. Behind every customer that says yes and is keen to go forward with you, there's going to be like 100 or 1,000 no's. And we're going to have to get used to that super quickly. It's not a bad thing, and it's not a defect of your business by any means. I also then want to go over, some practical tips, maybe even exploring whether or not door to door, as daunting as it sounds, is something that still has merit in the year of our Lord 2026. And then the last thing that we'll briefly touch on, but expand more on next week, is going to be building systems. So how to create a sales funnel, what it is, And yeah, we'll go over that a little bit more detail later on. Cool. So where do we start? Like I mentioned earlier, if you want to make a living selling books, your job is not to become the best author, but the best selling author. So being the best at delivering a particular good or service does not actually make you a successful business. So to give you guys a little bit of more context around that, a lot of what I do professionally primarily involves training people that are starting like car detailing businesses, right? And a really, really common mindset that I find with a lot of my students, and I think this applies to like all of us, right? Especially if we're starting businesses and stuff for the first time, we kind of tend to come at things, I guess, from a wage earner's mindset, right? And that's not to to diminish earning a wage by any means. Far from. It's like 100% a very noble thing. When it comes to the context of starting and running a business, though, we do have to alter our perception a little bit. Like through school, if we look at things like the grading system, we're often like very focused on our technical skills. And then when we start our business, we sort of tend to make the error, for example, in this detailing context. I've worked with plenty of guys and gals in the past that feel like, because I can work on, I want to accumulate all the skills. I want to learn how to repair leather, how to do body shop work, how to do paintless dent repair and window tinting and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, great, now you can offer maybe the best services in town, but if nobody knows about you, and nobody's booking you in, for work, it doesn't matter that you're really good at doing all this other stuff if you don't have like the sales to show for it. So that's just the thing that I wanted to reiterate first. So now, what are some kind of winning strategies to get the ball rolling? So I'm a huge fan of door-to-door selling for a very specific reason. Not because it's the most effective, it's not. Not because it's the most scalable, it by definition isn't. But because what it teaches people, like from the outset, is how to get comfortable with pitching their business, right? And how to get comfortable with rejection. So if you guys, this may not be applicable to every business type, but I'll tell you how I'll tailor that advice a little bit to those of you guys that are selling goods and services. Um, I think the benefit of like getting out there and experimenting with some door-to-door work isn't necessarily because I would expect any of you guys to get a huge amount of sales or booking from it, but because just getting comfortable with rejection, understanding how to pitch your business in that like 1 minute interaction at a stranger's door is actually an invaluable skill. So I would highly encourage you guys, if your business is the type where you can feasibly like tailor your sales pitch to a door-to-door sales pitch, even if you're not going out door to door, it's a very, very worthwhile exercise to at the very least getting you comfortable, or more comfortable, I should say, with selling your product. It's an invaluable experience. The next strategy that I'd love to go over with you guys, this is a very practical tip, and this one is scalable, it is effective, and it is a really, really helpful way of doing this. Is actually to look at community Facebook groups. They are a real gold mine. If we leverage these community Facebook groups correctly, then this can be a huge and very easy way to build your customer base really quickly. But there is rules and there is guidelines, right? So if you're just going there and like spamming the business constantly, everything looks like an ad, it's not going to work. Community Facebook groups in particular work really well because they're community based. And the thing about a small like local business, you want to have a local presence. You want to have a community presence. And in order to achieve that, a really important aspect of that is making sure that people are familiar with you and with your story. Even better if you can get them invested. So one of the things that I would highly recommend, and again, this is all free, about, if you're making a post in a Facebook group, don't make the mistake. I see a lot of people make this mistake, where they'll often try and like posture their business as being like some big enterprise, right? Using a lot of we instead of I, right? Using logos instead of your name. That actually hurts. It doesn't necessarily help you, especially in the early days. If you kind of posture yourself in your business as this like nondescript corporate entity, a lot of people think that that gives them more legitimacy, but in reality, when it comes to trying to establish and build a community presence, that does the opposite of establish trust. If people know who you are, especially if you live in a smaller town, it kind of creates. Oh, sorry. Do you mind? I think I've got somebody who hasn't muted. I apologize. But it kind of it sort of hurts you a little bit in the sense that, excuse me, um, when people know the person that they're dealing with, it establishes a level of trust off the bat because people perceive that as an accountability thing. And the other thing too that we mentioned earlier about, we want every customer to be a fan. Using these Facebook groups to like introduce yourself, that's the time to actually tell your story. But we also want to keep that concise, and we'll go a little bit more about that in the next session. So what are some obstacles that you might face? Obviously, the first and the main one that we've already talked about is going to be a rejection. So fear of rejection will often bring a lot of small and promising enterprises to a screeching halt. So taking the first no for an answer, sometimes we have a tendency to kind of reach for a different reason for the rejection, and that's a pitfall that's super easy to fall into. So I'll give you guys, like an example. Like, let's say that you're trying to sell a particular good, right? A lot of that initially, you're probably going to have to start with, doing some like guerrilla marketing stuff, right? You might just, you might just have a little Shopify storefront, maybe just telling people in the community, maybe even selling it like, at farmers markets and stuff like that. If you try and say approach like a big conglomerate, like say like a supermarket or something, like a Pack and Save or a New World off the bat, and you're like, I want to get my products onto your shelves, and immediately they're sort of like, we don't know who you are, we don't know what this is. Sometimes it's easy to kind of take that first no for an answer rather than realize that's probably not the first step that I should have taken towards selling the product. Now, that doesn't mean that it's impossible. Obviously, the generator is doing some great work opening up opportunities like that. But the reason I bring this up is because sometimes it's easy for us to kind of like look for, I guess, other or different reasons that can sometimes create artificial barriers of entry. And the reason I want to focus on that is because often at times I've worked with students that they have a great service, they have the capacity to deliver, they even know how to talk to customers well, but they think to themselves like, oh, I need to invest a certain amount in a logo or a website, or, I need to create an LLC, or I need to be GST registered. And the thing is, a lot of that stuff, it is going to be important down the track, and certainly when you grow your business to a certain point. But we sort of sometimes, I think, tend to gravitate towards thinking about those things as being prerequisites when they're really not. They're often things that should happen naturally as part of our business journey with growth. They're not by any means, and bar very few situations, ever like functionally a requirement.
If I can jump into that, I think a really good way to deal with rejection, like emotionally and within yourself, because I think Gabriel deals with this easier because he's just really used to it, but is to realize that every person that contacts you is a potential customer, but they may not be a customer. And so let's say you sell cookies, for example, and you go up to someone, you say, hey, do you want to buy some cookies? And they say, oh, I'm gluten-free. Then you can think in your head, oh, I need to sell gluten-free cookies. Well, actually, what you should be thinking is, this is not my customer. Maybe you can expand into gluten-free sort of, maybe you can expand into like gluten-free later down the line or something like that. But right now, you need to focus on who is your customer now. And so if someone says no to you, maybe they can't afford it, maybe they don't like what you have to offer, and that doesn't mean that there's something you necessarily need to change. It just means, well, this person is not my customer, but I'm going to go and find my customer.
That's right. And I think another really helpful way of dealing with that obstacle, and this is super important, I can never overstate this enough, is the importance of follow up. When somebody says yes to you, like in an initial conversation or initial interaction, that's only the beginning. This is what we'd call like a lead, basically. That somebody's a prospective client, but all of those leads are subject to attrition, which basically means that people lose interest, they cool down, they're no longer like as hot and ready to go, right? Until the deal is done, there's no money to count. And if we're not following up regularly, this kills our sales faster than anything else. So these are the two main obstacles that I want you guys to be familiar with. One of them is, internally being prepared to handle rejection, because like I said, every successful business that manages to sell to a lot of people also loses the interest of a lot of people. But conversely, we also want to be really careful and make sure that we're not losing good customers that have already basically given us our yes, because we're not getting back to them quickly enough. So, what can we learn from rejection? Like we talked a little bit about earlier, we want to examine every time we get a no, we want to examine that interaction honestly. We want to try and examine that interaction in context, right? So, avoid kind of reaching for those more abstract and more nebulous reasons for why somebody may have said no. Like I said, things like GST registration or establishing an LLC, stuff like that. Like you will know when you need to do those things. Um, and that's basically what there's that famous saying, when you hear hooves, you would think horses before zebras, right? So that means basically, if something has happened and we're trying to retroactively kind of like analyze an interaction that didn't go as well as we wanted it to, is to just look for the more probable, or think for what was actually probably the issue here, rather than something a lot more abstract. And then, like Abigail mentioned, just accepting and realizing the fact that not everybody is your customer, right? This is a really important part of when we're designing our business from the ground up, is realizing who is our target market, who is our client base, and not to waste time, energy, on resources on people that are not your target market to begin with. That doesn't mean that like we dislike these people or anything like that, but it just means that they're not in the market for what we're selling. So, it doesn't make a lot of sense to spend too much time and energy and resources trying to close sales where there isn't any to be found in the first place. Another really important thing is what not to take away from our rejection. It's actually quite rare for pricing alone to be the issue or even the main issue. Just because your particular good or service is out of a particular person's budget doesn't always necessarily mean that that service is too expensive. Generally speaking, what that tends to be more a reflection of is one of two things. One is that maybe you haven't communicated the value or educated your customer enough beforehand as to what it is that you're actually providing. So they may be comparing it with, if, for example, in the context of car detailing, that's something that takes a long time to do, takes a lot of skill, takes a lot of expertise. It's very different from a $20 trip to a car wash. Occasionally, if you haven't designed your sales funnel very well, I might end up attracting a lead that is a car wash customer, not a detailing customer. And they might sort of balk at price because they haven't been properly qualified by the time they get to me.
What a lot of people do when they start a business is they'll say, okay, well, I'll have my prices down here. And then as I get better and as I get more experience, I'll raise my prices over time. But the reason this doesn't work is when your prices are down here, your customers are people who are willing to pay this price, right? So then you get better, your skills get better, your product gets better. So now you want your prices up here, and now you have to go and get all new customers because you've priced out all your existing customers. So instead, you want to think, well, I want these customers. That's my goal, right? So start here, start with your prices. And at the start, you might be a little slower. You might be, there is still skills that you can learn to get to that level. But those customers, especially if they love you and they love your story, they will stick with you. You won't end up actually losing them, because even if you do put up prices, you're not going to have this big jump, right? You're just going to put up prices, let's say, to go with inflation, because down here is not sustainable. You end up burning yourself out because your product gets better. You put more work into it, you put more time in it, but you're still getting this amount, and you've still got these customers when you want to be up here with these customers.
The other thing too that's really important about that is, remember that you can always downsell if you need to. So this again, even if you're selling goods rather than services, right? If you start your pitch with your most premium offer, if somebody really is hesitant on price, don't just immediately reach for cutting price on your initial offer. But you can have a downsell prepared. Have a scaled back version of your product where you're still making a healthy margin. But that way you can accommodate, a shopper who's either more price sensitive or somebody who could be your customer, but doesn't actually need the highest level of the service that you're providing, right? Because the other thing too that we really want to avoid, unless you're doing commodities trading, which none of us really are, right? Like none of us are here are going to be like, big multinational producers of like corn or something, right? Like a crop like, corn or apples or something like that is just going to be, like a set price, and it's the whole thing is about economies of scale and people going as low for possible as price. Once you can end up doing that to your own service. But the problem is, especially if you're like a small, like a micro enterprise, right? Like it's just you and the family, or maybe it's just you. You're never going to be able to compete with a giant factory that's like producing 1,000 units an hour or something like that, right? And can sell it like next to nothing. Instead, you want to posture yourself in a completely different market, generally something specialized, something that's a luxury, something that takes time to build. And that's why selling the story becomes so important. Once you start doing things like cutting price, you're inviting comparison shopping. People that are just looking to extract the most value out of every dollar, which ultimately comes out of your end. And that's a much more difficult space to actually be trading in. So we kind of have this funny little paradox where the larger your enterprise is and the more capital that you have to work with, the more feasible it is for you to actually target that kind of economy market. But when you're small and when you're starting out, you're actually going to have a much easier time trying to run a business and operate in an environment where you're primarily focused on luxury and high margin goods. Why? Because you're working at a much lower volume. So therefore, if you're at a lower volume, you're going to need those higher profit margins and therefore are going to have to scale and adapt your marketing strategy accordingly.
If you hear a customer who's price sensitive, what we often like to do that really works for those customers. So I'll obviously use the car thing because that's what we do. Is we'll say, oh, it's going to be $300 to do your car, and they go, oh, I don't know. And then we might say, okay, well, tell you what, we'll throw in a wax finish on the car for free at that price. Or, let's say I'll use a cake as an example. You're selling cakes and they say, oh, that's quite a bit. You say, okay, well, tell you what, this is for your niece's birthday party. I'll calligraphy her name on the top for you for that price, because that only takes an extra 10-20 minutes from you, maybe a bit of more product, but then you can actually make that sale because now they feel like they're getting more value and you did not have to lower your price.
Yeah, that's a great example. Like a really one way that I would highly encourage you guys to, if you ever get an objection on price, is to basically try and change the playing field a little bit. Like instead of just instinctively cutting price, doing things like Abigail has mentioned is such a good strategy. Just trying to do things to kind of pad out the initial offer in ways that do provide additional value to the client, but are not ultimately going to have any major impact on your margin or the time that you're having to spend delivering that particular product. So again, going over just kind of two, very common examples, again, in the detailing context, but this is applicable to any business. So let's take two different customers, right? This is going to show you guys, the difference of, somebody who's been well qualified as a lead by the time they reach out to you, as opposed to somebody who's not. So for example, our first example, John has seen some detailing videos online. He likes going through the car wash and figures that detailing is probably about the same. He inquires about a clean and then is just totally stumped on price. What's gone wrong there is that basically John hasn't been, qualified and educated, and that's actually the business's responsibility in a sense, right? It's not John's responsibility. But if you're providing the service, ideally, and you're never going to get this 100%, but you want to basically like try and educate your customers as much as possible on what you do, how you do it, and to have a good idea as to what your pricing is going to be off the bat. In this particular example, somebody's reached out who doesn't kind of know a whole lot about what's going on. And then they just have a very different expectation. And when the two of you talk, things basically begin to fall apart. That's not to say that somebody like John can't become your customer, but that in this kind of an example, they're usually not going to be unless we can turn that around. But that's usually much harder to do than just trying to attract people that are going to be qualified leads in the first place. So then looking at our second example, Tracy's been following your personal page for a number of months. She loves your videos and she knows your story through and through because she's been following along for a long time. In your videos, you talk openly about your pricing. You clearly, show what goes into your work. And she's super excited to work with you. So by the time that this prospective lead reaches out, she's not going to be sensitive on price because she already knows more or less what you charge. So she's already been price qualified in that respect. She's not going to push back or have too unrealistic expectations because she already knows what your outcomes and what your results are because she's seen them on video. This is kind of an ideal example, but we can very much do this, right? Posting on social media is free. Creating video, like it does take your time. But again, the value of that investment of time is we want to remember that philosophy, every customer a fan. If we can get people invested and excited into what our story is, that is only going to do good for our business, and it's only going to qualify our clients.
And I would add, be vulnerable. Like we all came from the generator. We all have, reasons that we started this business, reasons that we're, trying to make a living in this way. And so be really open about that. Say, I'm a single mom of two, and I do haircuts in my garage because I want to, help afford things for my kids. Just talk about your experience or your living or what got you to this stage, because people can care about that sort of thing, and then they'll come to you because they care about you as a person.
Authenticity sells.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and that's the thing at the end of the day is like almost all of this is a very fancy way of saying like we want to have good relationships with people. We want people to know us, to like us, and to trust us. And one of the key powers of social media and being able to share your story is you can end up creating, what's called a parasocial relationship, which is basically a fancy word of saying, I'll put it to you this way, like by the time a lot of people reach out to us because they've been watching our content, usually for like a few months, um, they by the time they call you, they speak to you like they're your friend, even if you've never heard from them before. This is a wonderful thing. It's a great thing. It also means that generally you're going to be working with people that like you, they respect you, and they're also willing to be patient with you as well. Super, super important. We're going to talk a little bit more about this next session, but I'm going to mention it now because it cannot be overstated. Under promise and over deliver, right? You want to try and you have a key responsibility in managing your customers' expectations. That's not to say that you're going to tell your customer, "Oh, I'm going to do a terrible job," right? But if you've got a particularly, like I said, in the context of the service, you've got a difficult job ahead of you. You can say, "Look, this is looking a little bit tricky. I can maybe promise like a 70 or 80% improvement, but I'm not going to get this to look brand new." Say you're not able to get it looking brand new, but you've gotten fairly close, you've exceeded the initial expectation that you've set, that's going to be a happy customer. If you tell the customer, every person that is interested in your business off the bat, this is going to come out looking mint. It's going to come out like brand new from the factory, even if you're working with like a 30-year-old car that's had like dogs living in it for 10 years, you're setting yourself up to fail. It's not going to happen. And this is true for like if you're selling a particular good as well. Like let's say you're dealing with a wholesaler, you want to start wholesaling your goods and selling them at that level. Be realistic about what you can deliver, and ideally tell them a little bit less than what your actual capability is. And that also gives you some wiggle room that if things go wrong, and they always do, you're not going to be up the creek without a paddle, right? So, what are some takeaways that I want to kind of focus on from this first session? Number one is like we talked about that mindset shift, right? So, I just looking at the chat again, I can see a lot of you guys are professionals. You have incredible services, and that's amazing. But remember that the kind of artisanry or skill that you're applying is not actually the most important part of your service when it comes to it being a business, right? That's not to say that you're gonna like neglect to do your job well, but in some sense, I'll explain it to you guys this way. Like I said, in the detailing context, I've worked with a lot of businesses that are incredible detailers, but don't know how to sell their service well. They don't know how to manage leads well. They don't know how to market well, and so they never go anywhere. I've also seen some enterprises. There's like one in Miami that I know about is like, and I don't mean this to like rubbish the business, but like they work on supercars, and some of the stuff they do would like make like even like a hobbyist detailer like cringe. But that business is still doing like $1 million a year, right? And ultimately, why is that? Because they've got their selling systems down pat. Does that mean that they're like a hack or illegitimate or anything like that? Like, of course not. Like at the end of the day, the purpose of a business is to make money, and they're doing a good job. It doesn't really matter. The customers of that business don't really care that the methodology is not like the most primo or the most supreme. What they have is something a lot more valuable than that. They have a good relationship with their clients, and they've got a good system in place to keep bringing them in.
And I want to add to that. I know a lot of people, from what I've heard from the generator, they're really passionate about their business and they want to do it to help people. They want to help people get something, a product or service that they've always liked and they've always wanted available. And you don't have to take that away and just focus on selling. I think the important thing to realize is that if you're not getting customers and you're not getting paid for your work cannot continue and it's not sustainable. So if you do want to help people with your business, then the best thing to do is to become good at sales and become good at marketing, not just to make money, but so that your business can continue and so that you can continue helping people. So it doesn't have to be, yeah, you don't have to lose your heart or anything like that.
Yeah, that's it. Like tell friends, tell family, like don't stop talking about it. The second that you stop telling people what you do, they lose interest in it. People's attention spans are very short. We all have very busy lives. If you're not keeping the the nature of what you do very visible, very conspicuous, very obvious, people forget and people stop reaching out. And obviously, we don't want that because that would mean the end of our business, right? So again, some of those practical tips is seek out leads. Look for anybody who could be interested in your good or service, like all the time. Any interaction. Look at things like like excuse me, Invercargo, for example, we have something like called IYP, which is Invercargo Young Professionals Groups. There's lots of different like networking opportunities like that. And some of them, like even if they're paid, you can usually end up attending a couple sessions for free anyway. Just getting out there and like getting people familiar with what you do. Another really cool thing about groups like that, so there's also places like BNI, they're very active in New Zealand, Business Networking International. Like they'll let you attend a couple sessions free, and then if you want to join, there's like an annual fee or whatever. But they'll usually only let somebody from one particular industry in. The really cool thing, just looking through the chat about what you guys do, I like a lot of these are so unique that you're not gonna like there's not gonna be another competitor in a lot of these BNI groups. I can tell you off the bat, like most of these BNI groups, like they're gonna have one lawyer, one accountant, one like more normal sort of trades. A lot of what you guys are doing is like so unique and so specific. You can join like 10 of these groups, and you're going to have an opportunity there to get people familiar with your service, and that's a good thing. And like I said earlier, those community Facebook groups, Real Goldmine, social media, posting TikToks, posting Instagrams, posting YouTube videos, like make content. We live in an attention economy. You want to grab people's attention, and there is so many avenues now for you to do that for free. The other thing that we, again, just want to reiterate, rack up those rejections, right? Every person that says no brings you one step closer to a person that's going to say yes. Don't feel defeated by those rejections. Don't like ruminate over them excessively to a point that's unhealthy. But what you can do is try and do like, an analysis after the fact, but keep it like honest with yourself, right? That person may not have been your customer, or maybe you didn't actually explain your offer that clearly. Sometimes what we have, and part of the reason that I wanted to focus so much on the mindset at the beginning, right, is sometimes we are such experts at what our craft is that we can talk way over people's heads. That's really easy to do, guys. And, odds are if your interaction with a prospective client, if you're doing like 80% of the talking, it's not a good sign. Generally speaking, you want your customer to be telling you what their needs are, what they want, what they're after. And then you should be trying to keep your pitch as short and as concise as possible, specifically addressing their own personal needs. So when it comes to doing an analysis on kind of some of those failed sales interactions, recognize that that's not necessarily a failure. That's a very important and intrinsic part of growth. But also just kind of like acknowledging and recognizing from within that, maybe my pitch was a little bit overloaded with detail. Sometimes we get so excited and so passionate about what we do, that we want to like cram it to like this much detail or this much technicality. And that just burns through people's attention span. They lose interest and they're often too tired to even want to deal with you anymore. It happens and we can learn from it and we can do better next time. And that's something that we'll definitely go into much more detail in our next session. And then last thing, and this is, like I said, a little bit of a teaser for what we're going to focus on next week. We want you to build systems. Don't forget your leads, whether it's like a calendar on the wall or, something a little bit more modern, like Jobber or Go High Level or any kind of there's a lot of CRM programs out there, and like I said, we'll talk a little bit those down the track. But whatever system it is that you use to keep track of who your like active leads are, people that you're in talks with at the moment, you want to be following them up. As soon as you get a lead through, ideally you want to be positioned to actually answer their request and give them a call back within 5 minutes at most. Usually if somebody has like seen your ad or seen your post and they reach out to you, they want that dopamine hit, right? They've seen something, they like it. That's the time, like, they reach out to you, you need to answer the phone straight away, right? If you're not easy to contact, people have to go through hoops to like do business with you. They're just not going to. Like, it becomes too difficult and too hard. Um, there is there is a way that you can sort of get around that, but again, it's just, if you're too difficult to reach out to, you're going to lose a lot of sales, right? Like, you can create a business that can survive without very frequent follow-up, but follow-up more than anything else, and how quickly you can get back to people, is going to honestly like make or break a sales interaction, like 60 to 70% of the time at a minimum, probably closer to 90. So getting back to people, being easy to reach straight away, we cannot overemphasize the importance of that. So cool. Thank you guys very much for sticking with me through those 40 minutes. So now for kind of like these last 20 minutes or so, I would actually love to hear from you guys. So please, like we said, don't be shy. Be bold, be conspicuous. I would love to hear from you guys. What are your reflections, your thoughts, your comments, and questions? Most importantly, your questions. Should have an incentive. Maybe we get like cookies and put them through the camera.
We just did such a good job. There's nothing. Come on, be obnoxious.
Yeah, seriously, like don't be afraid to be cringe. Okay, how do you connect to a BNI group? Great question. Like, just look up what your local group is. The thing with BNI, okay, BNI is great. Like, they do work quite well, but I'm gonna tell you off the bat, like, it's not the, like, I'm trying to think how to explain it. I would kind of put it a little bit more in the category of like, the benefit of it is kind of like the benefit of going door to door. It is super important, and I highly recommend that you do it, specifically for the purpose of getting comfortable and getting your name out there. But it's not as scalable, like, depending on what your service is, right? But it's not as scalable as something like going to community Facebook groups. So I really appreciate your question, but that one thing I do want to clarify about, we probably should have made this a little bit clear earlier, is like, those groups are great, but don't feel like, and don't make the mistake of thinking that like membership in a group is what's gonna, the be all end all for you getting like sales and stuff like that.
I think what often happens with those groups is you have a young business owner, professional wanting to meet sort of other business owners who are experts and know what they're doing. And then when they get there, it's a whole bunch of other young new business owners who also want to meet experts. And the experts have already sort of aged out or grown out of those groups. But I still think it's really good to get involved with other local businesses and hear what they're doing and work together, but just be mindful that it is going to be a lot of people at your level, and it's not really going to I think the mentorship they often sort of promise.
To be fair, I think that's more the case for something like IYP. BNI tends to be like,
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, all good. They're like a little bit more established. Yeah, fair enough though. Okay, so two questions. What do you do when it's super quiet, no sales, no leads, no movement? And how do you make use of tax breaks? Okay, great question. So number one, with regards to tax, I'm not an accountant, so please don't take this as tax advice. It is also the case that I'm comfortable with you sharing a little bit about what we do in that regard. So one thing that I want to make super clear as far as tax breaks are concerned and stuff, right? So most of you guys, from my understanding, will be using either like Henry or Zero or something like that. If you're using, say, for example, Henry, like, do not neglect to upload your expenses. Henry makes it so easy, so simple.
Whether you use Zero or Henry, this is because so I do the taxes for us. Read through basically everything that Henry has posted. They have these really huge, like, blog post they write in a really readable language, it's not too complicated, where they go through everything you could claim and how you would claim it. So even if you're not using Henry has put a lot of really good information out there, and I've read basically all of them, so I almost have an idea in my head of anything that I could upload that I could get a bit of tax benefit from.
The other thing to bear in mind, though, and something else I want to focus on, sometimes like we kind of get this idea of like a tax break as being like, you know, some like magic words that you can recite to have a lump sum of money given to you by the government. Um, that's not really what a tax break is. That's what the generator is. Not just kidding. But that's not really what it like. What the tax break is going to do is whenever you like transact through Henry, obviously they're going to withhold a certain like percentage of that income as tax. They'll set it aside to cover things like your ACC, if you have a student loan, that sort of carry on. And then as you submit expenses throughout the year, effectively what you're trying to do is you're trying to reduce your overall tax liability so that at the end of the financial year, they can calculate if they've basically, like withheld too much or paid too much to IRD, and then you can get that back at the end of the financial year.
But you gotta earn the money. So you
Correct.
can't you make this much, you get taxed this much, and then you get a tax break to make up that amount. But if you're making this much, a tax break is not going to help you. You got to make the money.
That's right. And another super super important thing to remember is like let's say you've sold a good or a service for like $300, right? And you spent like $100 worth of material on that service. If you then like spend more money to try and like reduce your tax liability, say you get your profit down to zero for the year, right? It's not like you're gonna get everything that you've paid like in tax. I'm trying to think of how to explain it. Oh, I know how to put it. So like, because I made this mistake when I first started out, and I just want to focus on this because it's super easy to make this mistake. Don't think that every like expense that you put through is like let's say you put like $1 in expense. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're gonna get like an extra dollar back necessarily. Generally speaking, it tends to be about on average 30 cents on the dollar. Because remember, like if you hadn't and the reason I mention this is because if you go out of your way to like try and like find more expenses so that you pay less tax, a lot of people, will sometimes do this. Um, if you had kept the dollar, right, then you would have kept the dollar. Whereas if you spend the dollar for like tax purposes, you're going to get back on average like 30 cents of that dollar, but like the rest of the dollar is still spent. It doesn't come back to you. That's just something that I want to focus on because sometimes we can try and find, like we talked about earlier, like other kind of like sideways of making things different. But like Abigail mentioned, if there's no sales to begin with, then the tax breaks aren't actually going to do anything for you. They're just going to increase, like, the claiming more expenses or putting forth more expenses is just going to make your good or service more expensive, period, to deliver.
So I just wanted to answer the latest message. The Zoom meeting is being recorded by the generator. So, and then I will go to the first question you asked. When it's super quiet, no sales, no leads. So I have three things for that. One, make sure you don't have any dormant leads hiding somewhere. Maybe someone messaged you on TikTok and you meant to get back to them and you haven't yet. Or if someone like commented even on one of your videos, like, wow, this looks awesome, you could message them and say, hey, I noticed you liked what I did. Is that something you would be interested in? Anything like that. So dormant leads. The other one is to make more content. So just more places where you get your face out there in public, and those can sort of bring on leads. But lastly, and you may not like it, door to door, because that gives you just that exposure and that experience. It's one of those things that yeah, it may not be the most effective, but when you have no leads, you've got to do something and it's free. So you got to get your face out there.
Yeah, 100%. The other thing too that I also want to answer, and I'll get to the other questions because it's nice. The question you've asked is so good. It's going to answer some of these other questions that are coming through. When it's super quiet, no leads and no movement, that's the time to get busy, either doing things like knocking doors, or making posts in these community face. Like that is the time to start. Like it's called tending for work. It's kind of you want to get your tendrils out there so that people are like interested in, like, they'll tug on a lead and then you can pull them in, right? You want to make noise about your business, but you want to make the right kind of noise, and I'll talk about that in just a second. Yes, you guys will have access to the recording. I think an email will get sent out to you later on or something like that. So another question, when you're talking about community Facebook, is that a specific community we should be, or just means to have? Yeah, great question. Actually, I did sort of take that for granted. I wasn't that clear about it. So for example, we live in Invercargill, big bad Invercargill. So we've got like our biggest local Facebook group is called Invercargill Community Notice Board. Um, Everywhere in New Zealand is going to have some kind of equivalent, like, whether it's like your local Winge group or your local, whatever, or a buy, sell, and trade group. But just double check the rules, but also don't let like the rules like discourage you, especially if they're a little bit vague. So like, so some posts will say, like, some groups will have like no solicitation, and what they'll mean by that is like, don't just put in like, like you wouldn't want like Harvey Norman going in there making a post and being like 40% off all computing needs for the month of January. Like that's not gonna, but if you're like a community member, right? And you're like, kia ora guys, my name is, so and so, and like I've just started doing this thing. I thought you guys might be interested. Here's a little bit of our background.
Worst
This
thing
is
can happen is they remove it.
That's right, yeah. But if you make it like more personal rather than advertise, like what you don't want to do, like this will get you like deleted from those groups really quickly, is if you like post like from your business logo or your business page, and you're like, we are a firm that specializes in blah blah blah. Like that doesn't gel, and it doesn't work, and it also doesn't really connect with people. People like doing business with people. They don't like business with like faceless conglomerates. We kind of usually resent those. There's enough of those out there in the world as is.
Really appreciate you asking about tall poppy syndrome, because there's two aspects of tall poppy syndrome, and one is the one I think we've talked most about, and that's internalized. On the inside, you don't want to stand out too much, you don't want to make a big deal, you don't want to be obnoxious, and I think we've talked a lot about that, but I think you're talking about more like the external. So what would you do for the yeah.
Okay, this is an awesome question. So there's I'll give you kind of two answers that are going to seem contradictory, but I promise you they're not, and I'll tell you, explain how I weave them together. So the first answer is that, like, if you're telling people what you do and it kind of puts them off, like, if they're not a prospective client, like, it doesn't really matter, right? Like, they're not, like, you're not courting them for business. It doesn't mean anything, right? Um, so on that sense, you could just not care. However, I'm also going to give you another bit of advice that seems contradictory, but I promise you they do work. What's happening there is you're not really connecting. Now, like, I love bashing tall poppy syndrome as much as the next guy, right? It is also the case that when you want to be like a presence in your community, right? And that's kind of the goal of building your business up. You want to be like known and liked. That doesn't mean that you have to go and like be popular to everybody or something like that. But it does mean that you are going to want to learn like how to connect with people. So what's happening there, right, is like a disconnect. Now that doesn't mean that you have to like ruminate and get anxiety about like every interaction has to go perfectly smoothly and everybody has to like what you do. But there is a huge value in something called code switching. So I'll explain to you what code switching means. Basically, like, when I get a client that's like coming through, right? Like, let's say, I live in the deep south, right? I get a lot of farmers in like gumboots, they've got like real dirty utes. They don't want to know about like the technical things. I'm not going to talk to them about paint decontamination and pH levels and wax treatments and ceramic coatings. Like, who cares? Like, I'm going to adjust my language to like make them feel more comfortable, right? So what does that actually look like? So for example, my farmer and gummies. Yep, sweet as, not all good. Keep like they don't have the mental bandwidth to like, or it's not like, not because they're like dumb or anything like that, but they've got a lot going. They're looking after a whole farm,
Yeah.
right? People want to keep things short, simple, sweet. Keep it simple.
Another sort of the opposite example, we get people, they're like young guys, they've got these like street racer type cars. They want to know all about the polishing and the paint decontamination and the leather rejuvenation. They like spending money on their cars. The farmer, he just wants his car clean, right? And some people like spending money on their cars, and so you have to talk to them. You can call them bro, and get sort of try and be at their level. And yeah, so I think sometimes what people are hearing is they feel like you're not meeting them at their level, and then they think you're sort of showing off. And again, you're not always going to reach that, but like that is a good thing to aim for.
So this is my thing, right? Like it's easy for me to like talk about, and there is value in it. Like, I really, tall poppy syndrome is not a good thing, but I also think it's really important to like be, I guess, a little bit of a pragmatist in terms of like, connecting with people in your community, right? So for example, that introduction, I love what you're doing. It sounds amazing. Like you tell me like that you're the leader of an indigenous hosting, like I'm like, whoa, that sounds amazing. I love it. I'm here for it, right? Um, Sometimes you're gonna like I'll give you another example, right? I might introduce myself to someone in a certain context, like in a BNI context. I'm the owner operator of Invercargill Automotive Detailing, right? Cool. I might interact with another completely different group of people, and they're like, "What do you do for a living?" "Oh, I clean cars." It's not as glamorous, it's not as sexy, right? But like it's, you know, like it connects better. I am kind of the belief, as terrible as tall poppy syndrome is, I think that generally it's important to learn how to like adapt your pitch to your audience. That doesn't mean that like you should change who you are. That doesn't mean that like the tall poppy syndrome is a good thing or anything like that. But it does kind of mean that like, there is a way for us to kind of like change our air depending on who we're dealing with, just so that we can connect better. And I think we're going to go over about like that in more detail next week. But I do kind of want to plant the seed now that like, it's not always like, it's not to say that it's your fault, right? That's not at all what I'm saying. But at the same time, I also don't want to like kind of go and say that like, the other person is doing something wrong. But we also like, if we just put the onus exclusively on them, um then for example, like what if, excuse me, even if they're not your prospective client, they may know somebody who is. So in general, we want to try to just connect better with people, and that can mean, changing the way that we talk about our work depending on who our audience is.
I honestly think that you put it really well. You say, you asked any advice navigating around this. It is something you have to navigate around. And I also really like what Sally here said. Yeah,
100%.
it is a form of jealousy, and it does sometimes come from your own group. And it's rough. I guess I just wanted to
Yeah,
say that. You can't. I don't want you to feel like we can't just be really, really good at what we do and then solve racism, right? We have to, we're gonna have to navigate around it, and it does suck. Yeah.
that's it. And like we have plenty of real world examples with this as well. Like, super lastly, and car cleaning is sexy. Oh, thank you. Your current views of trade marketing and copyright. Okay, I adore this question. Thank you so much for asking it. Okay,
He's
this
taken, by the way.
yeah, this is my wife. This is a great question. I'm going to tell you off the bat. Um, it's not that it never matters, but when we're starting out, it really doesn't matter. Like I wouldn't even, you know what I mean? Like it's I'm trying to think how to explain it. Like especially
You're not making enough in a year to pay the copyright lawyer to look at your logo. It doesn't.
yeah, like here's I'm trying to think how to explain it. Like trademark and copyright, like there is a time and a place, and you're gonna know, like it's gonna be made very evident to you, like, you know, when that will be, if ever. Because this is the other thing too, right? Like I know plenty of businesses, like, and again, maybe this a little bit of bias because I live in the deep south, right? Like very rural community. But like there's plumbing outfits here that work on farms that trade over $1 million a year. And I can guarantee you they've never copyrighted anything in their life.
And they've got Spider-Man on the back of their vans.
Oh yeah.
We saw that the other day. There was one with Spider-Man on the back of their van. So
yeah, they should get a cease and desist letter from Disney, but like it's they won't, like, because well,
Sorry.
anyway. But like the point here is, right, because we talked a little bit about this in the presentation, and I want to just focus on it again, because like the reason I bring this up is I think sometimes we kind of get like fixated on like the idea of like running the business, and then we kind of like think about all these other like abstract business things, and we think that we need to do them to like build legitimacy, right? So like I need to establish an LLC, I need to be GST nice, I love the Spider-Man photo. I need to be GST registered, I need to be like, I need to have a good logo. Like none of that matters if you're not already literally making like $10,000 to $20,000 a month straight up.
Like we have an example. It's, to be fair, it's a charity. It's not a that Gabriel was on a board of, and they spent several meetings trying to figure out how to play music in their op shop and like license the music. And it's like there are like Harvey Norman or something is just playing the radio. Like they're not paying anyone. They're not worrying about it. And like the worst that can happen is they come to you and they say, "Hey, can you stop?" And then you stop. And I don't think that's going to happen anyway.
So yeah, like I love the question, but yeah, like don't worry too much about that stuff. The things to worry about now are making yourself known and like getting out there. Here we go. I need a new laptop and my annual software subscription paid, hint hint. Yeah, I don't get that one either. I'm sorry. But it sounds funny and I like the winky face. So. um but yeah, super cool. Any last minute questions, guys? We've got a couple minutes left, so
We
feel
got
free to
two more
think.
of these sessions, so don't feel like you have to.
Yeah, don't feel like everything has to come through at once. Like obviously we went through a lot, so you'll want time to digest that. But well, while we still have the time, if anybody last question of the day who wants to be the brave soul.
Um, how to overcome a product? Say you have few products in your product line. One gives you, like, say for example, I run a coffee van. So my coffee is the co-product and most profitable product, but I have to keep pies and all that, to serve a platter, maybe to give more options. But some products like pies and all are not very profitable, but I don't want to take it off because it will be just a basic coffee ban if I take those off. So how to overcome those things? Because I've been trying, these bulk buy, not bulk buy, what do you call, combos and all that,
Mm-hmm.
but still somewhere the profit goes from somewhere.
Yeah, 100%. Brother, I love your question. Thank you so much for asking this. This is so important, and we're actually going to talk about it more next week. But I'll give you an answer now, okay? Um, I'll put it to you this way: there is nothing wrong with being a basic coffee van, like straight up. Like in fact, being a basic coffee van is a really good thing for like multiple reasons. One of them is that like you can just focus on the coffee and your coffee can get better. You can do more of it. I think sometimes we want to and I get this a lot, like for example with my detailing coaching clients, where like they want to offer all the services because they want to be like a one-stop shop. There's kind of this idea that like if we have the most comprehensive offer that we can make to people, that's going to like draw more customers in. But necessarily, like, not really. In fact, I love what 26 Presidents Empowerment has said here. Yeah, look at your sales and maybe just have like the coffee in your most popular treat.
And try not to get too stuck on what you think you may need to be. You can always try being a basic coffee van for a week, a month, and see how it goes. We have a business that started recently here in Invercargill, and they sell burgers. They have 4 burgers on their menu, no fries. They've got a drinks fridge. That is it. But they make really good burgers, and they've just been able to hire on more staff because of how well their sales are doing. And now they've added like tater tots because they still don't want to have a deep fryer. But before that, he was just selling burgers in a little shed in his backyard. And if he had gotten caught up on the idea that he needs to do burgers and fries, and then he had to have a deep fryer, and then he had to have a whole thing because that's what everyone else is doing, that could have really hampered him.
100%. So even just to kind of like give a little bit more around that, like there's I'll put it to you this way. Like, I think sometimes what can happen, right? Because I want to give you this warning ahead of time. Like, let's say you do a trial run and you have no pies. And then you have like 3 people asking for pies that day. Um, that's gonna feel bad. But like human beings in general, we tend to be more adverse to like a perceived loss than a more um like nebulous type of loss. I'll explain what I mean by this. So like let's say you had 3 people ask for pies on a particular day and you didn't have pies to offer them. Like it's very easy for the brain to be like, "Oh, I've just, calculate the price of the pies, the potential sales lost and then be like, "Oh, I've lost $30 or something," right? Well, that's assuming you're selling your pies for $10 a piece, but you know what I mean. But also not really, because like even if you're selling the pies for $10 a piece, what's the cost of the pie itself? Or what's also the cost of having the pie warmer in the first
What
place?
stock you have to have on hand, and yeah.
That's right. Like it's one of those things that like if it doesn't make like if I'm trying to think how to explain it. Like when I say if it doesn't make money, it doesn't mean that it has to be like $1 above break even. But like if it's not a worthwhile part of your enterprise, like in general, then cut it out and focus on what is making you more money.
And if this applies to anything, if someone asks for something from your business that you don't have, don't communicate it in negatives, try to do positives. So if someone comes to you and they say, "Oh, do you have pies?" Say, "Oh, well, we specialize in really good coffee." Or if someone, comes to us and they say, "Do you do mold removal?" We say, "Well, we specialize in bringing cars up to brand new. There's other people, they do mold removal." So instead of just saying, "Oh, I don't do that, we don't do that," say, "Well, this is what we do. This is what we are good at." And try and sort of frame it in that way. And then it doesn't feel so much like a loss to them or like you're missing out on something. And again, it tells them, well, this is not what we do. We do this other thing, and it might actually appeal to them.
So yeah, thank you very much for asking that. Yeah, the more exclusive, the better the perception.
Yes.
Yep, that's right. And this is something we're going to talk more about next week, guys. Is like sell to the rich.
Yeah, clear communication. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. And have a very clear offer. So no, thank you very much for those contributions. Radio, I think we'll leave it there for today. Hope you guys have gotten good use out of the session. You're very welcome. Thank you so much, everybody, for turning up. And yeah, we would love to hear from you. If the session worked out well for you. If you guys have any more and further follow-up questions, I think we can probably send an email out or something. Because I'd love to talk about some of that stuff in the next one. So but yeah, thank you so much, everybody, for logging on. And yeah, no worries. It's been a real pleasure to share this with you guys. So really look forward to seeing you again next week.
Thank you.
Awesome. No worries.